understand that it's about making small incremental changes that are sustainable. It's not about swinging for the fences. Be kind to yourself, little by little, slowly by slowly.
Hi, welcome to the Living Richly podcast. My name is Rob Dale, and I'm here with my great friends Trevor Munn-Venn and Eric Deschamps. And I don't want you guys saying a word about the fact that I defined you as great friends.
Right?
I am setting a resolution, and my resolution this year is to have great friends. And
Check.
I'm
Check
stuck.
mark. You nailed that one.
I'm stuck with you two.
Overachiever.
Right? We are talking today about revolution, not resolutions. And we're going to be looking into the idea of setting resolutions. I know that I am guilty of, whenever I'm frustrated about something, that I will immediately go to setting some kind of a resolution. I'm never going to do that again, or I'm going to do this again. I want to be able to create some kind of a task or checklist to keep me from the behaviors that didn't work well for me last year. You guys relate to that at all?
No, I think the story is the same. I mean, we've all, whether it's New Year's, I think New Year's, the reason there's so many resolutions made around that time of year is because it's a fresh new year. You've just come to the sun has set on the previous year, or is setting, and you probably entered that new year with all kinds of promises you made to yourself and to others about how you wanted to change and be a bit better this and a better that. And now the new year is upon us, and you're coming to realize that perhaps you made some progress on some of those, and perhaps there's a bunch of them that remain unfulfilled. And so we reset our lives. We look at an opportunity. A fresh new year gives an opportunity to kind of fresh reset, a fresh start. And so we do it again. We make these promises. I'm going to get healthy. I mean, the two most common ones, right? I'm going to stop smoking and I'm going to lose weight. Those are the two most common New Year's resolutions. And we know there's a reason. There's a thing now called Blue Monday, which is what, third Monday in January, I think, traditionally
that's
speaking.
the notion, yeah.
The notion. And the reason they call it Blue Monday, it's because according to the statistics, the vast majority of people have already given up on their New Year's resolutions
and
by
it's
then.
dark and it's cold,
and it's when all the credit card bills start coming in for Christmas.
Come in. Yeah.
Not a good day.
Not a good day.
Not a good day. But people do them for birthdays.
Right.
For me, honestly, one I would use was always actually Labor Day. Like it was, and I think that flowed out like
restart.
Yeah, restart kind of period of the year.
It's interesting because my girlfriend Wendy, who works in the fitness world, said that has become now the busiest season for gyms is September. And it's the reset. It's okay, I didn't have my summer body and now I'm into the fall and I got to do something. And there is something. So you're right. The dates change.
Right.
But the behavior doesn't.
It's this notion of, again, a resolution at its heart is I want to do better. I want to be better. I want to do something different. And in many ways, I mean, it takes that kind of decision to affect any kind of change. And as we're talking about, living your best life is going to require making those kinds of decisions, but perhaps making them very differently than you've made them before.
Hopefully.
Right. Because again, it was interesting. I was reading this great book, and it's talking about, the author talks about the research that was done around what is the best diet, right? That is the most successful. Is it paleo? Is it intermittent fasting? Is it keto? And listed a bunch of others. And in the same vein, another study about what's the best kind of training. If we're talking about just the tuning up of the body, right? And is it cardio? Is it strength training? Is it CrossFit? Like what? And the research showed there is no leader. There is no best one. The ones that work are the ones you stick to. The research showed that actually they couldn't point to any specific diet or training regimen having any benefits over others. The reason that people weren't succeeding at them, it's because they kept going from one to the other and trying something new. They weren't sticking to it. So there's this notion of, I think resolutions have this dark side to them that, we make them because they fill us with hope. They give us a sense of, again, that fresh start, that restart, turning over a new leaf. And yet we make them with this understanding that yet they have a very low success rate.
So we talk all the time, the three of us, that language matters.
It really
and
matters.
We are very deliberate with the words we use. We certainly encourage that with the people that we work with to really find the right language around anything. And we've titled this podcast today is this idea of revolutions, not resolutions.
Revolution.
And revolution is a loaded word when we think about it. So why is that? Why did we choose that as a title? What are we really trying to cover
Trevor
when it
picked
comes
it,
to
so
this?
he needs to try to unpack it.
Trevor
It's
is
really
the
a great
word
bit
guy.
of writing. Because resolutions don't work, so we had to find something else, right? So we know they don't work. That data, I went hunting for data, kind of go, okay, so how bad is this? And one bit of research, this company organization called Strava, and I think it's a fitness app. So they've got all this data. I think they had like 819,000 people's goals, intentions around it. Like so the content looked good around it, but they said 91% of people fail, and they knew which day.
I feel better.
Right. Rob finally
I'm
finds himself
solid
with
in the
majority.
91%.
Right, and they said, and actually, they know which day. It's January 19th, and they called it Quitters Day, which is a little harsh. Little harsh.
If your birthday is January 19th, we're sorry.
Happy Quitters Day.
Let's view it as a new beginning. There's a problem. So we know there's a problem if 91% fail. But when people talk about the solution, but what do you do with the problem? There's a problem with that.
Right.
Because when you talk about why do people fail with their resolutions? Well, you have a lack of accountability. You've been unrealistic in your goal setting. There's self-doubt. You didn't plan properly. You don't have enough people with you. But what it does is it firmly points all possible fingers at you. You fucked up.
Right.
As opposed to there's a problem with this approach, right? Eric, you said it. There is a pure intention, I think, for most people when it comes to setting a resolution, but they're not working. So we need something different, and maybe something radically different. We talked about that word radical before as well. Going to the root, but we know something needs to shift, and it needs to be major. Right? We need to find a different way to approach how are we looking at how we're growing, how we're embracing new habits, new approaches, whatever that's going to be. We've got to make a shift. And I think this is where the notion of revolution becomes more important because it is a dramatic shift.
Right.
It's a meaningful shift. It sounds radical, so you kind of go, okay, is that what we mean? In some ways, yeah. In some ways, yeah. It's to recognize why would we continue this pattern that's not serving us, or 91% of the population who tries to do it. Like that's an indicator. We should embrace that. But I think in some ways, that revolution is more about restoration of self.
Right.
Right. The revolutionary
Yeah, I love that.
act is to go to who are you really, and what do you need?
Right.
What do you need? It's not I have to lose this or gain that or be able to run this fast or those kinds of things. Those are secondary. It's a little bit further down the road, right? It's to get to what would it take to restore you to you? Because I would say that's a revolutionary act, right? Revolution, like revolve, right? So in some ways, it's a turnaround. It's an about face or a return to self.
Right.
Is another way to look at it. We know you look more broadly. It's a break with the past. Right? A revolution is to say we're going to let go of these traditions, these approaches. We need a different way of doing things. So there's a move away, but there's also a sense of innovation. There's a freedom to say, how do I want to create this for myself in a way that serves me better and serves us better, right? And that's when you're in a meaningful path.
Well, and I the idea of revolution, go back to even you used an example about reading a book a week for a year, and
And then February.
And then February. And then would that be 4 books or three and a half books? Depending. Was it a leap year?
February.
So
right.
Okay.
We'll figure that out.
I hate you.
The notion of reading a book a week can be powerfully transformational, or it can just be a check mark on a task.
Maybe I could have said
Right.
I want to learn about this.
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to who cares if I've read 52 books? So I've glanced at the words on a whole bunch of pages and a whole bunch of volumes, But does
Right.
that make me better, or does that give me, like, am I just trying to flex?
Well, and you lose the ability to, let's say you start reading a book and it's profoundly, changing you. But I've got 7 days to read this book. I don't have time to now take time to go through it and maybe go over it again and to allow it to really make an impact in my life. I've got to do a task. And
and it could be a book, it could be
Whatever
going to
it
the
is.
gym, it could be losing weight. Like, we
Absolutely.
could apply that. I think when we talk about it, the notion of revolution, perhaps the greatest revolution is what fuels your evolution. What is actually fueling that growth, fueling that drive? I mean, most resolutions, let's face it, whether they're made at certain times a year or it's just a decision, you usually reach a point where you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? Something's got to give, something's got to change. So there's this drawing a line in the sand kind of thing that happens, right? And I'm going to finally make that decision. I'm going to make the commitment. But let's face it, if that was enough, if determination and willpower were enough, then we would see a greater success rate on resolutions. The thing is that we're often what's fueling that evolution or that drive to change is fear. It's guilt, it's shame, it's other people's expectations, and a car will run on bad fuel. Right? You can have tainted gas. I mean, depending on how badly it's tainted, but tainted gas, a vehicle can run off of it, but not for very long and not very well. Eventually, you're going to have an engine breakdown. And I think most people are running on toxic fuel. Fear, guilt, shame. These are toxic emotions, toxic things that eat away at us. And we try to outrun them by saying, but look at me. I went to the gym. Look at me. I read that book. Look at me. I'm making this decision. The greatest revolution we need is to go back to, why are we doing this? What's fueling the drive?
why question.
And rather than doing it because of some external pressure or external expectation that our parents have put on us, our family members, our friends, our culture, is to get present to what really matters for me. What are my dreams? What are my aspirations? What do I want out of life? That is much better fuel to run on.
And I encourage you, if you're tuning in and you haven't had an opportunity to listen to some of the other podcasts, to go back and listen to the first two podcasts where we really do outline for ourselves, but also for all of you, what we mean by living richly. We give a lot of the elements and some of the pieces to the blueprint of what we are going to be discussing throughout all of these different episodes. It goes back to, and I think there's so much power to understanding what matters to you, and then setting those, the resolutions, the revolutions, setting the goals out of that, rather than just these picking whatever that case might be, as we've talked about, to really understand it. And we all work with a lot of, in our, certainly in our business, we work with a lot of business owners and leaders, and we will talk about the foundations of a strong and healthy business is understanding your core values, understanding your mission, your vision. It's true in us as individuals as well.
I would say even more so.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, in the world of business, even when organizations, for the few that have figured out their mission, vision, values, and they are the few, usually that's just a checkbox. It's a resolution of sorts that they know, well, we're supposed to have this. So they go through this exercise of creating these pithy statements that maybe then they post, behind the front desk at the reception.
They're marketing tools.
They're marketing tools, but they don't really drive their decision making, don't really influence what's going on within the organization. So it's not about just going through some empty exercise. If organizations who don't have a sense for themselves will kind of drift, well, if you don't have a sense of yourself, this is why we're drifting. This is why we're coasting. This is why, when the destination hasn't been determined, when I haven't gotten clear on what I want, anything will do. But anything is being determined by others. I'm going to be living, if I don't have a clear vision for my life, somebody else's vision is going to be guiding my decisions. If I don't get clear on what my personal values are, other people's values are going to drive my behavior. And that is a very, very difficult way to live, because you're giving energy to things you're not even clear about, and it's not getting that return on investment because it's not true you. It's not your authentic self showing up fully and deliberately in the moment. You're, again, living somebody else's story as opposed to sorting out your own.
Then we see individuals who aren't clear,
Right.
setting them for organizations.
Right.
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 And what are the odds you're going to get that right?
Right.
Right. Like you can choose any set you want. The question is, how do you live it?
That's like an airplane pilot with severe vertigo.
Right. Well, and you know, like, there's an organization, their values were respect, integrity, communications, and excellence. I'm like, I can get behind all of those.
Those are great.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but it was Enron.
Not so
Right.
great.
Not so great.
So I'm feeling like, living it out, like setting them is one thing. And this is where it's really easy to borrow language, steal language, go, that's exciting, or even read someone else's and feel that emotional response going, I want that too.
Right.
But that might not be yours. What you want is something that moves you
Right.
in that same way, but it has to be authentically yours because you cannot sustain what is not yours. And that's where people will put more and more energy to try and do it, to try and make it natural, to try and make it feel like self, but it's not. And if it's not, you can never sustain it. You can do it for a while, but the amount that it consumes, the amount of energy required is just, it's impossible to satiate the amount of energy that's required to pull that off. Right. You can only, when it's yours, again, the flow reverses. That actually fuels you to do that. So when we think about that revolution, right, turning away from old habits, old behaviors, things that are not certain, like that'd be the letting go of tradition, turning towards, right, this innovation,
Right.
what you really need.
Right.
What will restore you? What
makes you happy?
Yeah.
What are the things that you do? And it's interesting. I've been having a lot of these conversations. Part of my personal journey was getting present to that haunting question of what does it mean to live richly? And that I wrestled with that question for well over a year before the answer started to really kind of crystallize for me. I'm a slow learner. But this notion of asking myself the question, what are the things in my life that really empower me or enrich me or fill my cup? What are the things that make me happy, both personally and professionally? So in my work, what are the things that energize me? In my life, what are the things that energize me? And by looking at that and reflecting on it, came to see some clear themes emerging, right? So now instead of trying to make commitments to change that are just random, I know there are changes I want to make, but perhaps I'm again being driven by the wrong fuel. I mean, the wrong fuel is driving this process: guilt, fear, shame, whatever else. And now the fuel is, this is connected to what energizes me. This is going to help me do this better. So again, when we talk about a revolution, part of it is how we approach it. It's moving away from just the strategies and the check boxes and the doing, and focusing first and foremost on the being. Who are you? What matters to you? What makes you happy? And then what are the things that you're going to do in your life? How do you do more of those things and connect some of the changes you're trying to make to those things that you already have tremendous energy for and tremendous momentum for.
And we'll often say this when we're working with a business owner, and I recognize that we've got business owners listening, we've got executives listening, we've got factory workers listening.
I hope we have someone listening.
Is there anyone
listening out there?
We've got someone listening.
I think even Steve tuned us out.
Somebody please listen.
I'm listening. We're listening.
When we do talk to business owners, we ask the question when they're making decisions, well, what do your values say to that? And I think even when it comes to all of these kind of deciding on goals, deciding on direction, to be able to ask that question, well, what do my values say to this decision, to this behavior, to whatever that is? Well, if you haven't defined what those values are, the answer's beats me, right? Like
if you don't know what you value, any answer will do.
That's right.
But it'll be the wrong answer.
It'd be the wrong answer.
So let me ask you this question: how? Because I think a lot of people understand and go, "Oh yeah, no, what am I?" I know this when I will invite someone to explore what are their values. You've given a couple of questions that you've asked to help kind of figure that out. What are some other recommendations, suggestions? What are some practical things that we can be talking about that help people figure out what really matters to them?
Well, I think one is if you're going to live your best life, one of the things that is going to have to be a part of your life in a way that's true to you, that makes sense for you, is developing a reflective lifestyle. You cannot answer these questions in the hustle and bustle of day-to-day life, running from one thing to the next and never taking time to slow down and get present to your own thoughts, your own inner life.
So it's not going to happen during the drive-through at Tim Hortons.
It's going to be very difficult for that to happen. Now, I think
depends on the drive-through.
Exactly. I think we can have epiphanies just about anywhere, but when we have a reflective lifestyle built in, when we have some reflective practice, and that can look different. That could be meditation, it could be journaling, reflective writing, it could be just reflecting on your day, what you're grateful for, developing some sort of reflective practice. Again, what makes sense for you? There is no one size fits all here, but I would say it's an essential ingredient to figuring out what matters to you. So depending, I mean, we're going to do a whole session or a whole podcast and maybe more than one on figuring out your values. And we'll dive into some methodology. We'll offer some frameworks that one might use and some questions that one might wrestle with.
Resources on the site.
Exactly.
As well,
We'll post those in the show notes, right? But I would say to you, primarily, it's creating space, creating some space in your life to reflect on this stuff and to get present to what matters most. How do you figure out your own script? You need to write it. And a little bit by little bit, slowly by slowly, microevolution by microevolution. But if you're not creating the space, it's very difficult for those answers to show up.
Well, no one else is going to create it for you.
No one's going to write it for. Well,
like no one will create space
not your
for
story,
you.
but they will. Their story will become your story, and that's never a good thing.
Absolutely, because then you're living somebody else's life.
Right.
That accountability for creating space is yours and yours alone. And you have to take it in order to be able to get the level of reflection that's required, right? It's so important. Like the more you were describing, I'm like, yep, and that is yours. Like that is yours. I think things that support that. I think getting really clear on your needs. What do I actually need in my life? What do I actually need? It's amazing how few people know what their needs are.
Right.
And so to say, what do I need? And I think the corollary, the piece that goes with that is asking yourself, when do I or when have I felt most like me?
Right. That's a great
I think
question.
it's a great way to connect with your values, right? Or what you value. So if you get hung up on values, think about like, what do you value? What's important to you? When do you feel good, right? Remember, we talked about how feelings are functional, right? The feeling of good or happiness is literally your body saying, do more of that. Like, that's good.
Right.
That's good. It can go too far for sure. And then you kind of go, okay, there's boundaries. It's a container. Like, how do I move in that space? All of that stuff. But I think getting really clear on thinking either in your life right now, when do you feel most like you? And if you can't remember when you most felt like you, go way, way back.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Go way, way back. And I think that's why a lot of therapists, counselors will say, tell me about when you were a kid, because all this other stuff wasn't layered on yet. And you actually had a bit of a clear view of some things
Guilt,
that mattered.
fear, and shame did not yet wield that much power.
They
in your
weren't
life
really
when
in
you were
charge
younger.
yet. They weren't really in
You didn't
charge.
have those filters or all
Right.
that noise to break through, right? And I think that leads to, well, again, we're talking about what are the essentials to figuring out what matters to you. And I think another one, come back to what we talked about in episode 2, radical self-acceptance. Radical self-acceptance. I think without radical self-acceptance, most decisions we make to change that are often, again, based coming from the wrong place, and then the subsequent almost inevitable failure that follows only reinforces, I'm a failure, I'm no good, I can't do this, things will never change. It's a self-defeating cycle. And self-acceptance, I was actually thinking about this morning. it really comes down to four things. It starts with calling a truce with yourself. Stop fighting yourself. Stop beating yourself up. Stop blaming yourself. Again, that's where self-acceptance begins. Is let's put down the weapons of war. We're talking about revolution, so we can talk about weapons of war. Those are often turned on us. I mean, I think the vast majority of the leaders I talk to have a very harsh inner critic.
Yeah.
I lived with one for most of my adult life where that deep sense of self-loathing came from, because that inner voice, which was my own voice, was beating up on me all the time. Yeah. So calling a truce. Then learning to not just call a truce, but to tolerate your own weaknesses, tolerate your gaps, tolerate the things that you don't like about yourself, learning to make peace with them to some degree, not to accept them as your ultimate reality, but to begin to tolerate them a little bit more, open up the space where ultimately, as you begin to work your way through that, you start to trust yourself more. You start to trust yourself that I have a better sense of who I am. I've got a growing sense of where I'm going. And again, little bit by little bit, micro evolution by micro evolution, that trust begins to build until ultimately you learn to treasure who you are. And that's where radical self-acceptance begins to find its full expression.
It's so interesting how, as we've had these conversations, there are so many common themes that we see running throughout them. And when I think of revolution, not resolution, when I think about, kind of defining your values and what matters to you, I immediately go to community and the notion of it's very difficult, even with reflection and with that time, however you use that time, if you're not in a community or with others on the journey who can help you
100%.
in defining, I think of, I've shared this with you on a number of occasions, that one of the probably most profound aha moments for me over the last year or so as I've been taking this journey was you making a comment around one of the things that I value, that I actually had a script that said that's the least thing I value, that I don't like that at all, and it was around this notion of connection, that I don't need to connect, and I don't need I don't need to be in relationship with other people, because anybody that I'm in relationship with, it ends, they leave. It's right. And so then when all of a sudden one day you made the comment around, talked about that as being one of my values, it was because of the community of the respect that I have with you guys in these conversations, that I was able to now take that and embrace it and then begin to explore and go, holy shit, that's been a driving thing in my entire life.
Right.
And so being able to be in community, finding those right people to be on this journey, right from that foundational piece of what matters to me. For me to say to you, hey, Eric, these are the things that matter to me. Do you see that lived out in my life or not? You're now able to bring into some validation, but also maybe some challenge on some of those.
It's both support and calling you on your bullshit.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's authentic community where you've given others permission to speak into your life, or where you're truly looking for that validation that this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? There is going to be this support. There's going to be this encouragement. And there's going to be a bit of the mirror effect where you can say, well, I don't know about that, and let's talk about that, and a wrestling of it. I think if again, we're kind of moving away from the sense of making resolutions, but if anyone was to make a resolution, I think the very best one you could ever make is to not go it alone, is to not try this journey on your own, is to find that safe place to land where you can be your most authentic self, where you can begin to have some of these conversations. Reflection then expressed in conversation with other folks that are on the journey is transformational.
We believe in that so much that we even looked at it as we started to build out what it meant for us to share this journey of living richly with all of those that chose to be on it with us. We recognized that we had to almost immediately find a way to invite people into community.
Yeah, right.
And to do some of those things so that, because we recognize it is, if not to say it is impossible, it is almost impossible to be able to do this, to take this journey alone.
Right, and that's part of the revolution. Is again, it's moving away from that false sense of bravado, that heroic individualism that our culture sells us, which is complete bullshit. It's moving away. It's a revolution in our thinking about change and transformation, the importance of community, a revolution in what we believe about ourselves. Again, that self acceptance, right? That then can lead us. If a resolution flowed out of I'm learning to accept myself better, and because I'm loving myself more, I see self-care as a natural expression of that, right? So all of a sudden now I'm not going to the gym because I need to lose 25 pounds because that's what the culture's perfect model of being physically fit looks like. No, it's saying because I care about me and because I'm important and I've come to understand that, and I'm understanding it more and more each day, I want to take care of myself. I want to, as opposed to I have to. I get to, even as opposed to I have to.
If the goal is I hate myself, I need to change it.
The gym's not going to help.
No, the gym won't solve it. But the goal then runs counter,
right,
to self-acceptance.
Right.
So so the goal is literally working against you, and reinforcing the worst things you can say about yourself,
right,
instead of being a constructive act of growth and transformation. So you can do things and you can put in all kinds of effort. You'll get some kinds of results. Wherever there's action, there'll be some kind of result or consequence, but it still won't be what you're looking for.
Right.
Right. No amount of effort around that will give you what you're actually looking for if you're running counter to self-acceptance. If you cannot accept yourself, no amount of change or transformation is going to fix that. So it's about a sequence thing. It's also about inside out.
Right.
Right. It's about starting with 100%. Who you are, and then starting letting it, as you said it really beautifully, like this expression of my self-acceptance to say, you know what? I'm a spirit packed in meat. Like the meat is part of me as well, though.
Meat
and
bag.
So that's right. Sounded worse. No, sounded worse.
Yeah. Don't go there. Let's edit that out.
Steve, we're going to need some help.
I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm just saying it was uncomfortable. Right, but to be able to look and say, how do I use this to actually reflect who I fully truly am in an act of self-acceptance and self-care, rather than as these resolutions, which are so often acts of self-rejection.
Right.
Revolution is messy. No matter how you slice it, it doesn't have to be violent, but it is messy. And my sense is that most people, the reason they choose, even if they only end up reading 4 books, they set another resolution to read a book a week because it's easy. A revolution is messy. It's hard. Speak to that for a second. Just
well, I think the resolution, in some ways, it's almost like you're trying to prove something, right?
Yeah.
That this time I'm going to do it. This time I'm going to succeed. Whereas the other flows out of, again, this is now a more natural expression of who I am and who I'm becoming and what I want out of life and what makes me happy. It's better fuel. I've talked to so many leaders when it comes to their inner critic, and I've challenged them, on and coming from my own experience, I've had so much of that, lived under that tyranny for so long, that when I see it in others, I try to encourage them. And I've had so many leaders say, but you don't get it, that it's helped me succeed. It helps bring forward my best, my best effort. And it's been a huge part of my success. And I said, but it's toxic fuel. At some point, the only reason you're keeping that bastard around in your head is because you're getting something from him or her. There's a benefit you're getting, but it's toxic in the long run in terms of it's flowing from the wrong place. It's bad fuel in the tank. Replacing the fuel with, again, radical self-acceptance, radical self-care. Now and only now can radical self-actualization, becoming your best self, begin to emerge. The sequence matters. We've said this before. The sequence matters. So for some of you listening, you may be at various parts of that journey, right? Maybe you need to self-acceptance is where you need to start. And that's a beautiful place to start. Being kind to yourself, accepting who you are and making peace with yourself. Maybe you're at the radical self-care. You're moving more into taking better care of yourself, putting yourself first. Well, you're in a great place now to begin to take those other steps to say, it's not just about avoiding pain. It's not just about avoiding the ill effects of not taking care of myself. It's more about living more intentionally, not running from something, running towards something.
Yeah. I think that source, where is it flowing from?
Where is it flowing from?
Is the piece to check in
I
all
guess
of this.
I think it's probably the biggest revolution in all of this, right? Is what is fueling your evolution? What's driving that?
Yeah. Is it continued surface command? So people see what you want them to see?
Right.
Or is it, as you say, that embrace of self?
Right.
And to say, to recognize that each of us, for all we've been through, all the hurt, all the pain, maybe the suffering, that you're still whole and complete. And so to speak to that wholeness and that completeness and to say, how do I nurture that? How do I support that? How do I tend to that? How can I give that a little more room, a little more space, a little more care, a little more support, right? Those are goals or resolutions that bring meaning into your life, that are aligned with who you are, that will energize you and support you, right? It's not one more task in a busy life. It's one more must-have in a life that matters.
Right.
Right. And I think that is a revolutionary act in a world that is so focused on, right, checking off a list, demonstrating that they're busy, keeping up with everyone else, all of that. The revolutionary act is true care of yourself in real meaningful ways.
100%.
Yeah. Let's land this plane today. This has been really a powerful conversation. Any last thoughts that you would want to leave our listeners with?
Be kind to yourself. You're going to make mistakes. This is going to be a messy journey. We talk about self-discovery being an extreme sport, right? You're going to get a little dirty in this process, but be kind to yourself. Understand that it's about making small, incremental changes that are sustainable. It's not about swinging for the fences, because that usually sets you up for colossal failure, which only reinforces all the bad things. Be kind to yourself, little by little, slowly by slowly.
Yeah, I think it's not much to add to that. Like that, it's
pretty powerful.
It's spoken so beautifully. I think the more you can connect it to when you feel most like yourself. Whatever brings you to the foreground, whatever that was for you a long time ago or recently, do the things that feel like it's truly you, and forget about everybody else. Forget about everybody else in that, and what you think you should do or what it ought to look like or any of that stuff. Just go, I just like it because it just feels good. It doesn't have to be productive.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, you don't have to score points with it. It feels right. It feels like you. That's something worth spending some time with. But it comes out of that reflection.
Totally. And it's ultimately the ultimate revolution is a revolution of you.
Right.
Returning back to yourself. Folks, we're so glad you listened today. You dialed in for today's episode. One of the things we'd like you to consider is if you're enjoying these conversations, if they're meaningful, resonating with you, do hit the subscribe button on the podcast. You can also view these videos on YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel as well.
Share it with somebody, right? We talked about community and not doing it alone. Take time. Don't do it for us. Do it for you. Like, never mention us. If you want, well, I guess it's hard to share without mentioning. But the point isn't us. The point is about do this with people you care about. Do this with support. Do this with healthy relationships. And you know what? It might not be the person you're closest to. It might be the person you know in your life who is healthiest in terms of how they're living and approaching their life and their work. And maybe it's time to build and deepen that relationship. But share this if you can. Don't do it alone.
You are ready for a revolution. You're done with checklists. So we've given you 2 things to check off. Let me give you a third one that you can do, and that is to visit our website, livingrichly.me. If you /ACT, we will have some great resources there as well, including a values tool to help you start the journey to understanding and defining your values so that you're able to use them to manage the decisions that you make in your life. On behalf of my 2 colleagues here, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. We hope that you will take time to listen to the next podcast.